Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast. Join us each week as sports scientist and founder of Athletica AI, Dr. Paul Laursen, athlete, coach, and sports scientist Marjaana Rakai, coach and cyclist Paul Warloski, and everyday athletes discuss training, racing, and improving health and fitness. Get ready for your journey to peak performance. Hello and welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast, where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday endurance athletes. We have a two-part episode today. We're going to answer a listener question about nutrition and then get into the alphabet soup discussion in our training programs. So after our recent nutrition episodes, my friend Dan emailed me a list of questions, and I wanted to bring them up because I could only answer so far for them. So how does one start the adaptation to become more fat adapted versus carb adapted? And what kind of diet changes? I sent him a link to the green list from the Real Meal Revolution and Dr. Noakes. But what else should someone understand about the dietary changes in switching to a low carb, high fat diet?
I guess so. Just start with the question, like, how does one adapt or move to being more fat adapted versus carb adapted? And
Okay.
I think, first of all, just so everyone's aware, what we're looking at is we're kind of going back to, the metabolic testing that you might do in the laboratory. And someone might, if you're wearing that VO2 max kind of equipment, you're measuring oxygen and CO2 at the end of the day. And we do calculations and we can determine how much fat you're burning versus how much carbohydrates you're burning. So we can actually objectively get info on that. And it's pretty well established that you want to be burning more fat than carbohydrate at low exercise intensities, because that's indicative of being lower stressed and sparing all of your carbohydrate for later. So two ways that you can do that. One, don't forget about your diet and just train more. So we know that works, right? Like endurance athletes, the more they train, the better fat adapted they get, irrespective of what they eat. But you can pull the extra lever, not have to train as much, and probably be healthier if you shift your diet. So just to start there and give some context for the listener. So where do you start? Start anywhere you can, and a great place to start is, as you just said, Paul, with the green list from Dr. Noakes' Real Meal Revolution. And really, you're just working on getting processed food out of your life and having more complex carbohydrates. You're getting good quality fat, healthy fats in your diet, and healthy proteins as well, right? And that includes even processed meat. Processed meat isn't great either. So it's you're trying to get just how God or whoever planned it, right? Just take it from Mother Earth in terms of free range meat, in terms of fruits and vegetables. You want to probably work towards the lower carb vegetables to start, and those would be things like cruciferous vegetables, things like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, and there's a big whole list there and whatnot. Dom D'Agostino, who's an expert in the whole low carb area, he describes these cruciferous vegetables as just excellent fat transporters. They almost soak up and absorb fat into your diet. So they're excellent. If you have free range bacon, say for example, you could have that and cook that dish into those cruciferous vegetables, and they just absorbs in it quite nicely. And it's an extremely satiating kind of meal that's providing you with the complex carbohydrates that you want, all the sulfur products that you want, that are important for something called the glycolytics of the cardiovascular system. And then they gives you all the proteins and the good fats that you want as well. So, I mean, start wherever you can, Paul. But usually it's a process of getting into the cupboards and saying, how much of this is from the middle aisles versus how much of this is from the outer aisles. And that's the perfect place to start. And then you just keep working up to that as you go, and use the lists as a good guide.
Almost every day I'm just like chuckling myself because, you know, eating healthier is so much quicker too. Like you just throw some lettuce on the plate, you cook the meat or salmon. Like I love my salmon coming from the Nordic countries. So I just throw the salmon in the oven with some garlic, olive oil, and maybe asparagus or something. And that's my meal. Like how
Perfect.
easy and fast is that?
And talk to us, Marjaana, about your last ride, if you could, before Ironman Texas, and just talk us through what you experienced. And let's just give some more context, remembering that you've gone through a process of about 6 months or so of changing to this diet that we're talking about. And yeah, basically tell us about that
So
ride,
I had
Marjaana.
6 hour ride in my schedule. Was it last week? And off my memory, I think I ate scrambled eggs before the ride with my morning coffee. And it was a bit interesting one because I wasn't sure how much to carry with me and how much I was going to actually take in. It was pretty hot that day. So I ended up eating beef jerky first. I actually enjoyed eating that because it was salty. So maybe that was the point, getting that salt in also because it was hot and I was sweaty. Then I had almonds and Brazil nuts. And then I had some Lara bars, and I had to force myself to eat the first bar at hour 3. Note to myself that I did not enjoy those type of Lara bars. Then at hour 4, I ate another Lara bar. Then I had a package of baby food, like some pureed baby food. I think it was pears and apples, so that was like nice carb hit there, about 25 grams. And that was pretty much it for the whole 6 hours. So what I calculated, it was like 20 grams of carbs per hour.
Sounds pretty
I
low.
feel
How did you feel?
amazing. The first 4 hours was kind of a push. Like I struggled a little bit, but then after the 4 hours, I had some race pace efforts after 3 hours. So I did 2 efforts the fourth hour, and they didn't feel like super hot. But then the last 2 efforts from hour 4 to 5, they started feeling really good. And then the last hour, which I originally thought that the last hour from 5 to 6 hours was going to be a struggle, I felt super good. So I kept pushing the bar. It was amazing.
Yeah, and this is something that typically, eventually, athletes get to when they continue to push through, and reach this level of fat adaptation, as they start feeling better and stronger the longer they go on. And I'm not sure exactly what happens. I don't think we have the research to tell us, but if we're guessing, it's likely that the liver starts cranking out the stuff that it needs, right? Like the glucose that it needs, the ketones that it needs, the lactate that it needs. This is what the liver does for us. It's just our metabolic powerhouse, but it takes a big change, and this doesn't happen overnight. So how long did your total adaptation process take you, Marjaana? When did you start this?
1st of October last year. I'd say there's an adaptation period, and your brain is kind of fighting against what you're doing. Like your brain.
Yeah, and you think, this is ridiculous. What am I doing? This is
Yeah, and
never going to
especially in
happen,
the
right?
beginning when you're doing those long rides and you don't feel elevated, you just feel like, it kind of feels like you have a handbrake on. But if you keep pushing, you keep trying, eventually that handbrake is gonna come off, and the power is just incredible. It goes against anything like what you've learned before, like the longer the ride, the more tired you should feel, but you just, something switches halfway through, like, oh, after 4 hours, and you just feel, I can share the power files too, if you're skeptical, because you can see clearly that I was pushing more power at the end of the ride than in the first 3 hours of the ride. And it was hot, so I had to stop for a water break. Thankfully, we have fountains here in the area, so I was able to get some water, but pour on my head because it was getting hot.
Wow.
So Marjaana, back to Paul's question with his friend Dan, like what kind of advice would you give him just starting out?
Like on nutrition or just training on mental side?
Kind of both. Like, what's like the big package and stuff? So what are your reflections of what you know now versus when you know then, and put yourself in his shoes, because you were in his shoes.
I was curious because I had a decent training background, and the long run stuff just didn't get any easier, and I was expecting that. So I finally okay, I'm gonna try this. I committed fully and went with the Real Meal Revolution, and of course Prof's advice. But I think the biggest challenge was the mental side, like just keep trying and commit, not just for a couple of weeks but in a long term, and you will eventually start seeing changes. Like for me, the body composition change came pretty quickly, and then the performance on longer rides came kind of on and off in the beginning, but now it's almost expected. Like long runs and rides, if I know that if I can push through the first few hours, it's gonna happen. Like it just feels so amazing, elevated, so much energy. So the handbrake comes off at some point. Nutrition wise, like I've never eaten healthier, and it's really quickly to prep meals because you don't have to, first of all, go into the middle aisles. You just buy some fresh stuff, or if you have a garden, you can just pick from your garden, and choose good quality meats and fish, and it's so fast. So I guess keeping it
Perfect.
simple, that would be my advice. Keep it simple and trust the process and keep going.
One of the questions Dan asked was if there's a minimum amount of carbohydrate that we should be having in a day just for health reasons.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a common concern. And the answer, Paul, is looking to the science and evolution is you can have zero if you need to, because you have again the liver that we spoke of. The job of the liver is to give your body everything that it needs, and it's the process of gluconeogenesis. Remember, glucose, new, genesis, make. So that's its job, is to make all of the sugar that you need, or other molecules. And again, remember, so you can get away with having zero. Of course, you don't need to have zero, and it's very hard to get zero. You almost have to have like a lard plus meat kind of diet. But just kind of know that it's not something you need to pay attention to. And it's really hard to get even under 100 grams in your day. Is like, you really kind of got to be pretty focused on doing that. And I don't think you really need to focus on it much. Maybe a little bit in the beginning. It's good to give your body like that cold turkey cleanse of sugar, and see if you can kind of get to the quite low levels. But eventually you get so metabolically flexible that it doesn't matter so much what you consume, and you can have lots more complex carbohydrate sources later on as you build that resiliency. And because it appears that in most individuals you don't have this these big, long, spiky periods of your glucose. You just your body handles it all so much better. And I only know that from my own experimentation, wearing continuous glucose monitors and looking at my own response. That's where that kind of comes from. So I'm giving you a lot of this stuff is you're not going to find in a scientific paper. I don't, we're pioneering a lot of this sort of stuff. But yeah, there's no, to answer your question, Paul, there's no minimal, and pretty hard to get lower than 100 anyways. 50 is often recommended for ketosis to start the process, really get your body, get your liver making ketones, get your body accepting ketones, your brain, and you need long periods of time. I have a friend that's trying to do this right now, and he's really challenged in his context, mostly because of his family, and the meals that he eats with his family are very high carb based, right? And food is a very social, it's a social factor. We eat and break bread together, right? Not too much bread, hopefully. But yeah, and then like he can only really do these periods of low carb when he's visiting me, and he's got he's kind of he's a business guy, and he's away from his girls, and so it's not easy. Definitely acknowledging that, but it's certainly possible. It's something you have to. It's ideal if you can get the rest of your family on track, and at least eating a little bit that way, and then you can make some choices along the way too. So I'm not sure if you've experienced similar, Marjaana, or what you do from that sort of strategy standpoint.
I definitely feel a little bit of resistance from my family every once in a while, but like they're not pushing me, like they're not pushing carbs down my throat. A few eye rolls here and there, but
Oh, you have teenagers.
yeah.
Yeah, that was good.
But like if you're traveling a lot and you go to these conferences, it can be really challenging to find low carb stuff, especially here in North America, or baseball tournaments.
Oh yeah, it's almost impossible in like airports and stuff, eh? Like
No.
it is so challenging, but I always carry nuts in my purse. The other thing is that I was really aware of my brain sugar addiction. Like I used to eat candy. I loved candy. Like we grew up, Saturdays were our candy day. We got a bag of candy. And so I was aware of the sugar addiction. And the funny thing is that when you see the results and you feel the results of fat adaptation, you kind of start even, like you don't fancy candy anymore. Like you just like walk by candy store and you're like, I don't want that crap. And it's amazing coming from candy addiction.
Yeah, I walk past the good chocolate aisle and don't really, it's like I don't even think about it anymore, because I've tried some and it's good still, but it doesn't
hit the spot anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't taste the same. It's almost almost too sweet, and
yeah,
big change.
Like for me, ultimate challenge would be to go to a Finnish grocery store and pass candy aisle there, because Finnish chocolate is the best in the world, by the way. Phaser, yeah. No, Dutch have nothing on. So that would be an ultimate challenge for me if I can just walk by.
Shall we shift gears to another listener question?
Definitely.
This one actually comes from Athletica CEO Mark Bridges, who asked us, how do we decipher the alphabet soup of terms that come on training programs? There's CTL, ATL, TSB, TSS, IFF, or IF. Athletica tries to make it a little bit simpler, but then you look at Training Peaks and other programs that have all of these different abbreviations. So fitness, form, and fatigue are measured by CTL, ATL, and TSB. So let's talk about these three and what they mean. Paul, start us off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing the number of users on Athletica that actually know a little bit about these, and they do chase these numbers, and they get a little upset when they're not seeing what they want to see in terms of like Athletica does use these as a bit of a foundation for building the progression and the adaptation to the training program. So but a lot of times, a lot of the problems, and you want to see, ideally, you kind of want to see this steady rise in your CTL. Now, CTL is analogous for, it stands for, in the Training Peaks context, it stands for chronic training load. And that is analogous for your fitness, right? And we always use that word. Well, how fit can I get, right? So we often look at that blue line and we want to see it trending upwards. The problem happens sometimes with people in their user settings where they don't allow many training hours because they're time constrained, right? Like they might only have 10 hours to train in the week, so they put their max training hours as 10. If you put max training hours of 10, we have this really, it's a duration based or biased training load model. Training load is a product of your intensity of exercise times your duration. So this is coming from your wearable, and it's that is the stress, the training stress, and that's the main thing that's driving it. So if you're confining the model to a low duration, the model can't help but keep it sort of flatline, and that is what happens sometimes. And that's Marjaana, you're answering user questions often, so keep that in mind if you're answering them. But that's what the CTL one is there, Paul. The other ones, the ATL, that's your fatigue, and that's like an acute effect. Typically, we use this the amount of fatigue that's amounted over 7 days. So from an analytics standpoint, it's looking at a 7-day number. The CTL, chronic training load, or fitness, is looking at the amount of fatigue over a 42-day average. All right, and again, these are just estimates. They're not what's actually occurring in the body. We don't know those for sure. They're only estimates, so we can't get overly concerned, even though we tend to, right? A lot of us are number chasing. And then the TSB stands for, again, it's a Training Peaks trademark name for training stress balance. We don't use that. We use Bannister's original freshness. So we're trying to, and what Athletica is primarily trying to do is build your fitness and maximize your freshness. So that's what you want to do, right? You want to be as fit as you can and as fresh as you can before your event, like Marjaana's got with Ironman Texas coming up. So that's its job. That's what the algorithm's always trying to search for, and that's I'll start there, Paul.
I hear number chasing. I think a lot of us have gone that road, and I mean, like, back in old days, we used to report our training paper pen form, right? We just reported, okay, what did we do? How many minutes? How many of those minutes were, maybe tempo pace, right? We didn't have any of these numbers to calculate or build a model from. So remember, guys, like, this is just a model. It's not like, 100 fitness 100. It doesn't mean that you're you're gonna nail your race or going to Olympics. They are just numbers, and you can I have experienced to perform pretty well with the lower number than in training, because life happens, right? and you can do really well with the lower fitness number as well, because what you do in those sessions matter. Like, if you have 10 hours, say that you have two athletes, 10 hours training volume per week, or let's say somebody starting with training with 10 hours a week, that's reasonably a lot of training for somebody who's working, has family, what he does on those 10 hours matters, right? So somebody who is chasing numbers could be hitting it hard like every day, right? Over threshold, like every day. How long can he, keep up with that high intensity training at 10 hours? Probably not very long, right? And then he realizes, oh, I'm burned out. Maybe I need to start thinking like, maybe every other day I'll do something harder, and every other day I'll do something easier, and see how that, affects the numbers. So
Totally.
So, in Training Peaks uses intensity factor, and Athletica uses load. If I am correct, are those analogous?
I think it is. So TSS Training Peaks uses, and it stands for Training Stress Score, and Athletica uses the load.
Okay.
Right. And then the intensity factor is the other one. And Athletica uses percent FTI, functional threshold, and fractional threshold intensity. So, and that's basically looking at like what Marjaana just said, is what percentage am of my TSS. Sorry, what am I saying? TSS is load. Yeah, TSS, training stress score, is load, right? And then the intensity factor is how intense that is, how intense that load is, and Athletica uses the FTI percentage. So function like how much of the load is at a high intensity versus a low intensity, and it's usually as a fraction of it's in like 0.78, say for example, would be a kind of a that's 0.78 of your threshold, or your of your of your, what is it? I think we're missing one here. FTP. We're missing FTP. That's the one we're missing.
That's where
Functional threshold power. And Athletica is using critical power now, critical power and critical speed. So again, more alphabet soup here, right? I can see why this one's labeled alphabet soup. So we kind of needed the one we needed there was indeed the FTP, functional threshold power, or the critical power. So this is, you're actually looking at what your threshold is, what your capability is ultimately over 1 hour, and that kind of calibrates all of these load markers, right? We need to know. We talked about the how much stress that you're going to get in any given training workout. Well, you can train long, or you can train hard, or you can train long and hard. But we have a bigger stress if our intensity is high. So we need we need a demarcation point. We need where are we going to call hard? And we use critical power, which we get from your historical data. Training Peaks uses your FTP, which you get from a 20-minute all out. So that's kind of, everyone started using a similar sort of model there, and we get load from that. We calculate through and get a load factor for every given session based on that calibration point. And then so that's the intensity factor, is how much of that threshold have you worked at. And if you hit like 1, then that's like you're hitting right on your FTP for the whole hour. If you hit like 1.02, that would have meant that you're above that. You actually exceeded that. So in the workout reserve, that would have been a negative workout reserve, and you would have just exceeded your thresholds get reset because you've just hit a new maximal mean power.
We get a lot of questions from our users why my load is this and that, either too much or too little. And oftentimes it's because they haven't done the 5K TT running test, or, either the FTP or critical power tests, because their thresholds are still whatever it is, the standard that is on Athletica when they first signed up. So it's important to do those test weeks so that Athletica
Totally.
can calculate your training load correctly and your paces and power targets for each workout.
Yeah, it's a big one. Really, really key, and it's something like we're trying to automate that better for the future with doing a better retrospective kind of analysis when users are onboarding and looking at a better historical data. Because within 2 years of collected history, we should be able to capture those, but currently we're not there yet. So we do have that limitation at the moment, but make no mistake about our amazing back-end team is working on that innovation for the future. Shouldn't be too long now.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we have is that the FTP, especially the FTP number, can vary so much, day to day, and week to week, and it's an estimate at best. I mean, it's meant to be an estimate, but yet all of these training models are built on that number, which is an estimate, and so there's, like what Paul said in the beginning, it's a tool for yourself to hopefully look at some kind of increasing, fitness and compare the numbers with your own kind of work, and your own progress, I guess is where I'm going with that. But is there some value in looking at intensity factor as an IF to evaluate your ride? Like if I have a ride that's 0.7 and I was planning on doing endurance ride, is that a good ride?
Yeah, well, that means if you did an endurance ride at 0.7, then you're doing that at 0.7 of your FTP or critical power, whatever it may be, and yeah, it's just an overall global indicator of the external training load. And to me, it sounds like if you did it, you were probably around your L2. It sounded like a zone 2 kind of session. That's typically where it sits. And that's it's just kind of a box tick ultimately, is for sure. But you're only looking at the mean value of the external load. So we're looking at what you actually pushed in terms of mean power, or like the normalized power, and yep, that's a good thing to look at for sure.
Could you explain more about, you mentioned that Athletica uses more of the Bannister model without going too far into the weeds. How is that different than, computing form or training load?
So all of these are the same, and it is the TRIMP model. So TRIMP stands for Training Impulse. So Bannister started with this model. I blank on the year. I think it might have been like 1980. Actually, I think I was saying 70 before, but maybe it was even 90 actually. It was Bannister from Simon Fraser University published the first look at this model, and it's the same stuff that we just described. Same thing that Training Peaks, developed by Andy Kogan, used as their model. And but yeah, they're really, really no difference. The Training Peaks just has one that they've copied and trademarked versus, and like they're the first mover advantage. So everyone has just kind of adopted that terminology, and it's but it's really just a TRIMP model, a training impulse model that's used across all sports, even team sports as well. They'll use a TRIMP model. And you can use this with rating of perceived exertion as well too, right? You can do an RPE based TRIMP model too. So there's lots of ways, and we do the same as a bit of a backup in Athletica too. So we have multiple kind of ways that we get that model happening in the background for you. But that's pretty much the same, Paul.
Okay.
The only thing I might add is that is kind of going back to FTP and TF and TSS. One of the things that right from the get-go in terms of looking at your FTP, Training Peaks will take 5% off your 20-minute all-out power or pace, if you're going to use that in the running context. And that's just really, like that's kind of a crude. It's a good guess, but it's not the same as critical power. And again, this is what we believe is an advantage in Athletica is we're looking right across the whole spectrum of your power profile to get your critical power and your critical pace across the different exercise modes. So we believe it's a superior method, and we're pretty pumped about our methodology going forward, and it feels more science based than this arbitrary FTP kind of method that doesn't necessarily have a science-based. It was a great guess by Andy Kogan, and kudos for the effort in the time, but it's time that we move on, and we believe that others should follow the same method.
Can we talk about aerobic decoupling? When do we want to look at that number? Because I look at that number where for my athletes on long rides, long bike rides, and look at how that numbers.
It's a great number. Yeah, it's a great number, and it really so the range of the number that we're like, well, what is that number first? You're looking at an external load marker, so power or movement, relative to an internal marker like your heart rate. Really, that's the only one that we've got at this point in time. And what do you probably want to see in that? You want to see a low heart rate relative to a high power output. Let's just use the cycling context. And we see that, and you reverse the figures in terms of the mathematics. But basically, if you can go, like when I coached, pleasure to coach some of the top Ironman athletes in the world, and I know when they are absolutely going to kill it when their aerobic decoupling numbers start going negative, right? So they'll go out in these 6-8 hour rides, and I'm seeing like -3, -4, -5 kind of thing, right? So they're just to Marjaana's point earlier in the podcast where we were talking about the fat adaptation process, and they just get something hits in the back half of the training session, and they start going stronger relative in their output, their external load output, relative to how hard their internal body is working. And we see these massive negative numbers in these incredible world champions.
So when you're building up, say somebody's building up for a marathon, so we're building up long runs. What I've done is I start like monitoring the aerobic decoupling, say when we're in the building up the distance and aiming to hit a little bit like between 5 and 10%. I know that if they hit less than 5, they are good to extend it a little bit. Is that okay?
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm not using it that way, but that's a brilliant, that's a great coaching kind of way to go about it, because again, if it's only going to 5%, in other words, your power is only falling and your heart rate is only lifting 5% different, then that's great relative to a number that's like 10 or 15 or 20. Then that's, kind of alarming and saying, well, your heart rate's drifting really, really high and you're not showing good durability, right? So you don't want that heart rate's going skyward and splitting. You want it stable. The more it locks in and is stable at these, especially aerobic intensities, that's giving us confidence that the body is just dialed into hitting those numbers. those external load
and
numbers.
If the number is going up a lot, then I look at their pace. Maybe they pace themselves a little bit too hard, so that they're running just a tad, a little too fast. And then I ask them to the next time to slow down a little bit and see how that feels. Like how.
Yeah, great coaching advice, Marjaana. And don't forget also the podcast we did on the heat is another factor there too, right? So when you go into the heat, and we see the heat can also exacerbate that internal heart rate load number, making it higher. So you might the first time you are adapting in the heat, you might see a larger aerobic decoupling number, like towards 10%. Whereas in the heat acclimated process, you might start being closer to 5% or less. Then that would be like supreme heat acclimated kind of thing. It's not even your plasma volume's expanded. It's not phasing you. So
Point.
Yeah.
So why do these numbers matter?
Well, they keep us on track and honest, right? I think this really kind of comes back to the purpose of Athletica, right? Like we're trying to have a system that can help guide athletes and coaches towards their successful performance and their whole, their process. And these numbers help inform on our process. So it's a great question. I think that's, they're not the be all end all, as we spoke about. We shouldn't be chasing numbers. But that being said, we should be paying attention to the numbers, because they allow for conversations such as these.
That's about as good a summary as we're going to get. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the listener questions, because that's what drives this podcast. And join us next week for the Athletes Compass podcast. You can help us by asking your training questions in the comments here in our social medias, liking and sharing the podcast, giving us 5-star reviews, and engaging with us on the social medias, on Instagram and wherever else we are. For Marjaana Rakai and Dr. Paul Laursen, I'm Paul Warloski, and this has been the Athletes Compass podcast. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass podcast, your North Star through the sometimes complicated world of training for your endurance sport. For a deeper dive into the science of endurance sports, listen to the Training Science podcast and check out the adaptive AI training platform, Athletica AI. And thanks.